Coming in at number 5, we have Bodie, California. Located up in the Bodie Hills in Monte County, California near Yosemite, in 1859 4 miners found a good place to look for gold in the hills near the California-Nevada border. Bodie died in a blizzard not long after, but a small mining town sprung up at their camp. The town was home to 10,000 people. Bodie was a mining camp in 1859 where people had seen gold in its hills. Eventually it turned to a well-populated town. Though, like most mining towns, it saw its peak, its losses, and then its decline. Fast forward to 1962 and the town would be fully abandoned. Although it already showed signs of decline with dwindling numbers at the start of the 20th century. A series of fires forced the last remaining residents to flee the town, leaving it almost exactly as it was in the early 1900s. Dinner tables are still set up, shops are still stocked with supplies, and restaurants are still poised to serve long-forgotten meals. Today, the 110 silent buildings sit spaced out for traffic and people that aren't there. Buildings such as a barbershop, a church, a mill, a morgue, and a leaning hotel is held up by a beam have been left untouched for 100 years. Though since it has been left and abandoned for years, some of the buildings are in crumbling state of decay, while others stand strong, full of their original items but long devoid of their owners. There were also 16 saloons and thus a fair amount of danger. People were robbed and crimes occurred quite often, though the curse of Bodie has nothing to do with the fires or the shootings. It started because people started taking artifacts from the abandoned buildings. They take weather-worn shoes or pieces of glass from shattered windows. Somebody once ran off with a piano. Those items may seem like they have no value, but all objects carry equal significance in telling the story of Bodie. Thus, the curse of Bodie emerged, where if you take something from Bodie, bad luck will come around to get you. Because of the rumor spreading of a curse, people who stole items would send them back, often including heartfelt apology letters explaining that they didn't expect their fish to pass, or their romantic life to tank from stealing from Bodie. Coming in at number 4, we have Bannock, Montana. The once bright star of Montana is now a ruin, a town in arrested decay, with few remaining storefronts, saloons, and hotels. The town was founded in 1862 when a group of Pikes Peakers from the goldfields of Colorado set up camp on the banks of the creek. Finding gold, the miners staked claims and promptly failed to keep the find a secret. By the spring of 1863, the area boasted a population of 5,000. By 1864, Bannock had started to fade, losing importance. The remnants of the past still exist with empty buildings and weathered wood. Today, over 60 structures remain standing, most of which can be explored. The town is known as a site for paranormal activity. It is known that ghosts of the abandoned town walk the streets of Bannock. The most common ghost story, though, is the story of Dorothy Dunn. In August 1916, Dorothy Dunn, her cousin Fern, and a friend waded into a dredge pond and stepped into deep water, but none of the three knew how to swim. Luckily, a passerby was able to save both Fern and the friend, but Dorothy was not as lucky. Today, the site of the tragic drowning is referred to as Dorothy's Hole. Sometime after the accident, Bertie saw a ghost of her friend upstairs in the hotel of the town. She recognized Dorothy by her long blue dress. Although Bertie rarely discussed the sightings, other visitors began to report seeing the spirit of a young girl in a long blue dress in the window of the hotel. Others have reported cold spots, and some have reported trying to speak to the girl in a long blue dress. Bannock was filled with adult workers, crimies, murders, and of course the notorious sheriff and outlaw Henry Plummer, whose vast gang terrorized and robbed southwest Montana for years. Henry Plummer was handsome, well-dressed, and charismatic. He was also able to gain the trust of the area miners and was soon elected sheriff of the community. However, little did the citizens of Bannock know, but their new sheriff led a secret band of road agents called the Innocents, who began to terrorize the travelers between Bannock and Virginia City, robbing and ending more than 100 men over the next several months. Once caught for his terrible actions, Henry Plummer met his fatal end at the hands of the town's citizens. Today, many say that the ghost of Henry Plummer haunts this old settlement. Perhaps he wants to avenge his name.
In third place, time to visit the Bodie State Historic Park. So formerly a genuine gold mining town, located east of the Sierra Nevada mountain range in Monte County, California, and now a national landmark, it is known as one of the best preserved ghost towns in the world. It is named after W.S. Bodie, first name unknown, but rumored to be either William or Waterman, who discovered gold in 1859 in an area now known as Brody Bluff. He tragically passed in a snowstorm that same winter and was never present for what came to be. According to pioneer Judge McClinton, the district's name was changed from the proper spelling of Bodey to Body, and then a few other phonetic variations to eventually Bodie, after a painter in the nearby boomtown of Aurora lettered a sign as such. An accidental typo that stuck through history, which is a good reminder to proofread your work. I don't do it enough. While the output from the mine is largely insignificant in terms of mining history, the violence and early endings to lives tell a different story. And a particularly harsh winter between 1878 and 79 claimed hundreds of lives, with many others perishing from falling timbers and explosions underground. So Bodie as a town grew to have a reputation for violence and lawlessness. And unlike other mining camps at the time, killings were daily events. Robberies, stage holdups, and fights happened at such a frequency that no complete record could be kept. Reverend F.M. Warrington would describe the area in 1881 as a sea of sin, lashed by the tempests of lust and passion. The first of 4 mysterious fires tore through the business district in 1892, the next destroying the town mill in 1912, and another destroying the same mill again in 1898. The last of the unknown fires demolished most of what was left of the now ghost town in 1932, taking many lives way too soon in the process. So when the last producing mine shut down after 1945, very few people were left living in what was left of the town, and all eventually met untimely ends. One man shot his wife unprompted, and 3 other men from the town took it upon themselves to take his life for that act. So according to historians, the ghost of that man would visit the 3 men after his passing, shaking his fist and appearing as if he was cursing them out. Those men soon died of mysterious diseases and illnesses. Visitors to the area have reported meeting spirits that leave them feeling suffocated, seeing doors open and close on their own, and rocking chairs that may or may not have a menacing older lady staring them down, or even the empty chair rocking on its own. Though Bodie might be a bit of a tourist destination nowadays, but if you remove anything from the land, I'm talking like a pebble, you'll be cursed with remorse and tragedy. The park keeps a logbook of all letters and items returned to them, with each thief writing an apology note to Bodie for what was taken. The curse is upheld by the ghosts of residents past who guard against thieves and protect the town's treasures. Okay, so kleptos, steer clear or be cursed. In second place, we have the island of Poglia. Yep, another entire abandoned island. This one's a little creepier though. So the island is located in the lagoon near Venice, and is famous for being one of the most haunted places in Italy. Tourists and locals alike are banned from the island, which was used for centuries as a place to exile the sick to prevent the spread of disease and contain the mentally ill in an asylum built in the late 1800s. Yes, I'll backtrack and elaborate. So in 1348, the bubonic plague arrived in Venice and Poglia, like many other small islands at the time, and it became a quarantine colony. The plague on average killed 1 out of 3 Europeans, by the way. So fearing the unbridled spread of the disease, Venice exiled many of its symptom-bearing citizens there. So at the island center, the dead and those too sick to protest were burned on giant pyres. So this included the tens of thousands of Venice citizens just dying on the mainland. Those fires would burn once more in 1630 when the Black Death again swept through the city. The small island was used as a mass burial ground, and ashes from human remains make up as much as 50% of the island's soil. Cripes, I hope it's a good fertilizer. The deaths of nearly 160,000 people on the island have given it its nickname, the Island of Ghosts. A doctor at the asylum was known to have experimented on patients with crude lobotomies and jumped from the bell tower in the late 1930s after claiming he had been driven mad by ghosts. Decades later, nearby residents claimed to still hear the bell, although it was removed many years earlier. A report titled Haunted History states that some restoration work had started in recent history but abruptly stopped without explanation. Okay, maybe this is one spot on today's list that I might not want to visit. And in first place, we have St. Elmo in Colorado. St. Elmo is a ghost town and allegedly the best preserved ghost town in all of Colorado, while also boasting the most hauntings and paranormal activity of any ghost town in the state. The town was a major gold and silver trading center and the hub of life for many pioneers, outlaws, and miners for decades. So it was originally called Forest City, but St. Elmo was settled in 1878 and became an official township in 1880 with the arrival of the first post office. So the residents of the town were forced to change the name because there were already too many forest cities in the area. So gotta applaud the originality. St. Elmo went through a massive gold rush, reaching the height of its population of 2,000 residents in only 10 days. The majority of the town worked in one of the 4 local mines. The Mary Murphy mine was the most profitable mine and the longest operating, having produced over $60 million worth of gold while it was in operation. When the mines began to close down, the town began to dwindle. The Mary Murphy mine continued to operate until 1922, but was shut down when the railroad was abandoned. Postal service was discontinued in 1952 after the death of St. Elmo's postmaster. Now for the fun part, ghost stories. I saved the best for last for a reason. The most famous ghost of St. Elmo is Annabelle Dirty Annie Stark, not to be confused with the beloved Annabelle doll. This Annabelle is the descendant of Anton and Anna Stark, who arrived in St. Elmo with the Pacific Railroad in 1881. Anton was a section boss in the mines, while Anna ran the Home Comfort Hotel located on Poplar Street and the general store. Oh, and both structures are still standing today. Anna Stark was known as a cruel and harsh woman who never allowed her 3 children, Roy, Tony, and Annabelle, out in the town to mingle or work alongside what she deemed the simple town folk. Annabelle grew up attractive and passionate for the town, and her love of St. Elmo was fierce. After the death of her mother, Annabelle and Tony inherited the hotel, and the once impeccably clean establishment fell to shambles. So along with the decline of the town, Annabelle began to lose her grasp on reality. The town soon called her Dirty Annie because she would emerge in filthy clothing and her hair was in a tangled mess all the time. Finally, free of the harsh rule of her mother, most people assumed this was her quiet rebellion. Residents remember strolling the main street with her firearm loaded and hung over one shoulder, ready to protect the town from anyone who dared to threaten it. Since her death, it is told she can still be found roaming the streets. Only a short while after Annabelle had passed away, the hotel was left to a family friend whose grandchildren were playing inside the hotel, when suddenly all of the doors slammed shut and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The children cried and screamed, and finally the room returned to the outside temperature, and the door slowly swung open. Oh, that's not the only ghost story. Don't worry. A woman skiing down Poplar Street at dusk was struck by a peculiar sight of a lovely-looking woman in a long white gown glaring out of the second-story window of the Home Comfort Hotel. Now, the skier was shocked. She knew the owner of the hotel was on vacation, and nobody was supposed to be inside. As she turned to see what the woman was eyeing, she noticed snowmobiles approaching. So, sidebar, snowmobiling is illegal in St. Elmo, so the skier went and advised the group, who promptly apologized and went back where they came from. When she turned back to look at the hotel, the woman in the window was still watching, and she lowered her head, nodded at the skier, turned and vanished before her eyes. So curious and in disbelief, the skier went back the next day to find every window and door were locked. When the owner of the hotel returned, the two women searched the property with nothing to be found. So was it Annabelle keeping watch?
Number 5 on this list is the Devil's Pond. The Devil's Pond is a very beautiful and calm-looking body of water on the outside, but it's far more dangerous when you step inside. Located in the Queensland forest, the pond itself almost looks like something straight out of a fairy tale, but there's no happy ending here. 19 people have died in this tiny little pond. That's a staggering amount of people considering how small this one area is. In fact, so many people have had tragic endings here that there's literally a sign that says the creek has claimed many lives. Think about that. It sounds like something straight from a Scooby-Doo story. Beware of this pond or else, but seriously, beware of the pond. An ancient Aboriginal legend tells us of how a runaway bride fell to her death here as she was escaping her wedding. The bride was named Ulana, and it's believed that she is actually the cause of the many deaths that have happened here. It's said that she lures and tricks people into coming towards her, and then they fall in and suffer the same fate that happened to her so many years ago. I'm not sure if the bride legend is true or not, but even if it isn't, this is clearly an incredibly dangerous spot in its own right. Australia is a big place, so don't feel like this is your only option if you're going for a swim when you're there. Number 4 on this list is the National Film and Sound Archive. Located in Canberra, which I actually just discovered is the capital city of Australia. Always thought it was Sydney, but actually it's Canberra, so that's fun. But anyways, the Film and Sound Archive is a staple of media culture in Australia. It just hasn't always been that way. Crypto-naturalist Tim says the NFSA building is regarded by many ghost hunters or paranormal aficionados as not only one of the most haunted in Canberra, but also one of the most haunted in Australia. It's not because it houses spooky movies though. The ghosts that are reported in the building stem from the period that it was the Institute of Anatomy. That's right guys, this building prior to being what it is now was housing and studying dead bodies for 50 whole years. There were countless scientific experiments that went on here on hundreds to potentially even thousands of corpses. During this time, it was a museum as well and showcased the dead bodies to those who visited here. Because of all this death, the place is pretty popular among the ghosts. Apparently, the dissection rooms are the most popular with many paranormal sightings here over the years. There's also a little girl who many visitors have seen. She lives in the air vents of the building and pops out through the grates every now and again. Luckily enough, her intentions aren't evil though, and often tries to make people laugh. That being said, I still don't think that going to this place that used to house a bunch of dead bodies is the best idea. We have Netflix for a reason now guys, so Let's use it.
In at number 3 we have Thurmon, West Virginia. The historic town of Thurmon, located in the heart of New River Gorge, was established by Captain William D. Thurmond in the 1880s. Captain Thurmond passed in 1910, but the town continued its growth. During its height in the 1920s, the town was flourishing with a number of businesses and facilities in the railway industry. Thurmon had 2 banks, 2 hotels, stores, a cinema, and offices, yet after a series of setbacks, Thurmon soon went from boom to bust. A number of factors played a role in the town's slow decline. The first problem was the increased rail competition and the emergence of cars. Then in 1930, a fire that led to the closure of the biggest hotel in the town, the Glen Hotel, only furthered the decline. The final fate of the town was the Great Depression, and by 1950 Thurmon was a ghost town. Thurmon saw a small revival during World War II when coal was in high demand, but it was not enough. Afterward, the coal fields began to play out. Today Thurmon stands at just 5-person population, which is why it is nearly vacant ghost town, as the remaining residents either move on or pass away. The house and the land it sits on became the property of the National Park Service. Walking around Thurmon today is a sad reminder of the countless other boom towns which once thrived with human activity, but today are silent and forgotten. Many buildings have long since disappeared, either torn down or, as in the case of the well-loved hotel, burnt to the ground in suspicious circumstances. Many of the family homes lie in increasingly decaying condition, while some have disappeared altogether, leaving only behind a white picket fence and wildflowers which still blossom untended each year. The eerie atmosphere of Thurmon led many visitors to believe that this almost abandoned town is haunted. In at number 2 we have Cahaba Ghost Town. Alabama is home to many small towns. While some of these towns have very few residents, others are true ghost town because they've been completely abandoned. It's no secret that small abandoned towns give off an eerie vibe. As a matter of fact, one Alabama ghost town in particular that fits the bill is Old Cahaba. The small town of Old Cahaba is located in Dallas County. From 1820 to 1826, this small town served as Alabama's first state capital. Before the Civil War, Cahaba was a busy trade city located at the junction of the Alabama and Cahaba rivers. Over the years, floods and decay have affected this historical town. Thus, by 1900, the town was completely abandoned. Today, Old Cahaba is Alabama's most famous ghost town. Many buildings still stand, like the church, schoolhouse, and some houses. However, they have been left untouched for decades. You can still walk the streets of Cahaba and see the ruins and abandoned buildings, but make sure to keep your eyes peeled for the ghostly orbs that have been reported to appear in the garden maze at the home of C.C. Peggs. Additionally, many locals share similar ghost stories from the ghost town. While it's known that Cahaba is filled with paranormal activity, one groundskeeper that works at the new Cahaba cemetery has reported hearing voices as they worked. While tourist groups claim to have recordings of unusual sounds, and others say they've captured unexplained lights or shadows in photographs. Another site that's reportedly haunted is the Barker House. This mansion was built in 1860 by Stephen Barker and contained slave quarters behind the house. After people started leaving the town in 1870s, the house was bought by Samuel McGurdy Kirkpatrick. It burned in 1935 and was rebuilt, but today it's in pretty bad condition. The only people usually left inside are paranormal investigators. Reports from said investigators include seeing a ball rolling across the floor on its own and a stuffed animal appearing to communicate with something else in the room. But the most well-known haunting in Cahaba is Peggs' ghost. Colonel Christopher Claudius Peggs was the leader of the 5th Alabama Regiment and was wounded leading a charge at the Battle of Seven Pines in Virginia in May 1862. He died from his wounds 2 months later, on July 15th. As the story goes, a couple were walking behind Peggs' home in the spring of 1862. As they walked, they spotted a ball of light. They tried to touch it, but their hands went right through it. It disappeared, but later came back and followed the couple. Due to all the mysterious crimes that happened in association to Peggs, seeing an orb around his former house is considered a bad omen and possibly even a supernatural warning. And finally, in at number 1 we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. Located in a quiet valley of Columbia County, Pennsylvania, is one of the state's least likely and least publicized tourist attractions. Centralia, Pennsylvania, once thriving with 14 active coal mines and 2,500 residents in the early 20th century. But by the 1960s, its thriving business and population hit a decline, and most of its mines were abandoned. Still at that point, over 1,000 people still resided in the town, and Centralia was far from dying until a coal mine fire began below. In 1962, a fire started in a landfill and spread to the never-ending coal tunnels that miners dug thousands of feet below the surface. And despite repeated attempts to extinguish the flames, the fire still burns to this day. 20 years after the fire started, however, Centralia, Pennsylvania began to feel the effects of its underground fire. as residents started passing out in their homes from carbon monoxide poisoning. The trees began to die and the ground turned to ash, roads and sidewalks began to buckle, but some residents didn't want to leave despite the health risks, and for the next 10 years legal battles and personal arguments between neighbors became the norm. The local newspaper even published a weekly list of who was leaving. Finally, Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain in 1993, by which point only 63 residents remained. Officially, they became squatters in houses they had owned for decades. In 2013, the remaining residents, which were fewer than 10, won a settlement against the state. Each was awarded $349,500 and ownership of their properties until they die, at which point Pennsylvania will seize the land and finally demolish what structures remain.
Number 5 on this list is Tranquil Sanatorium in British Columbia. Tranquil Sanatorium has quite an extensive and tragic history to it, which has caused its walls to be the home to many undead spirits. A sanatorium, if you weren't familiar, is an establishment which has the sole purpose of housing those with long-term illnesses and is often associated with tuberculosis. The one that we're talking about right now is no different. It was built in 1907 as a facility to treat people with tuberculosis. However, it didn't stay like this for very long. The purpose of the facility eventually changed to become an insane asylum. It acted as this mental institute for a while until finally becoming abandoned in the late 1980s. Due to its deep history with death, disease, mental illness, it's no wonder that the Tranquil Sanatorium is now deeply haunted. The layout of this facility screams something out of a Stephen King book. It has several buildings that are connected by poorly lit underground tunnels. The building itself looks all too eerie from the outside as well, with dirty cream colored walls that have seen far better days as rot and mold slowly devour them. Visitors of this place report feeling extremely uneasy. A common note for most people that visit is the presence of orbs, strange balls of light that flutter throughout the building and then disappear. Some people have reported seeing a ghostly apparition on the 6th floor. This ghost takes the form of a woman not older than 30. She appears to be crying and screaming. The tunnels are said to be particularly haunted. People have reported screams coming from nowhere, flashes of movement, menacing and animalistic groans that make you feel as if somebody is right behind you. Children can also be heard playing every now and again in some of the more open areas of the building. Clearly, this place's dark history has impacted it greatly, and just because physical humans decided to abandon it in the 80s doesn't mean that it was truly abandoned for good. Number 4 on this list is the Fergusons House. The Fergusons House is part of Fort Edmonton Park, which, you guessed it, is located in Edmonton, Alberta. Fort Edmonton Park is a little tourist attraction that has buildings from 1885, 1905, and 1920 to represent the homes of the time. One of the houses is the Fergusons House. This home is interesting because during my research, I couldn't find any particular evidence of wrongdoings or tragic events at this home. In fact, for the most part, it seems like a pretty normal house. People have lived there before and no harm has befell them, but it seems that after they moved out and the home was donated, that's when things started to go a little bit haywire. There are reportedly 3 ghosts or demons that haunt this home, each one scarier and more dangerous than the next. The first one is the ghost of a beautiful floating woman who is dressed in all white. People have said that they've spotted her in the windows of the home looking out at them or slowly drifting throughout the living room. The second one is the ghost of a little boy. The boy will appear to certain people looking extremely ill. It is currently unknown if this boy died in and around the area or what disease he is suffering from, but it is said that he resides in the home with the woman in white. The third being is by far the scariest of all 3. A ventriloquist dummy that will appear in the home or in the cupboards. This thing can move all by itself and talk by itself. It is very similar to the popular horror franchise Chucky, and it's said by some to be seeking to harm the living. I'm not sure if the ghost of the ventriloquist has taken over this dummy or if the dummy has taken on its own persona, but I definitely do not want to go anywhere where the primary residence is a demon puppet. Number 3 on this list is the Beachworth Asylum. Ah yes, the classic haunted asylum. It feels like every country has one, but Australia's is particularly bad. The hospital opened in 1867 and was operational until 1995 when it was finally shut down. During that that span, when it was functioning, the asylum had over 3,000 patients die in its walls. That is an absurd number of people for a mental hospital. Part of this was because the methods that they used at this place weren't the best. Like most asylums that started in the 1800s, the treatments that they had for people dealing with mental health problems were far from ideal. Shock therapy, shackling patients up, just blatant torture were all things that went down at this asylum. Obviously, this didn't help anyone in dealing with their issues and caused a lot of people to pass away early. Now, these spirits of those who died here haunt the building. Screams can be heard ringing throughout the walls, with people thinking it's the ghosts of those who were being shocked or tortured. Some have reported seeing the ghosts of nurses walking around the building. These aren't your typical kind nurses though. People have said that they look evil and unforgiving. Deep feelings of depression can be felt here, and just a strong feeling of uneasiness. Personally, I see absolutely no reason to visit this horrible place ever, and in all honesty, I'm kind of surprised that the building is still standing. Number 2 on this list is the Monte Cristo Homestead. Built over 150 years ago, this home has had such a tragic history that many believe it to be Australia's most haunted home, and honestly, after reading about the horrific things that happened here, I totally understand why. Australian Geographic writes, a chain of violent events in the house have triggered other supernatural incidents. A maid once plummeted to her death from the upstairs balcony, and the figure of a woman in period dress has been seen walking along the veranda to the blood-stained steps where she fell. A stable boy who burned to death in his bed at the hands of his master is thought to haunt the coach house, while the ghost of a mentally disabled man named Harold wanders the grounds. Kept chained in the caretaker's cottage for 40 years, Harold was found curled up at the feet of his mother's dead body. He died shortly after being sent to a home for the insane. The sound of clanking chains is said to warn of his approach. All of those things are super scary to begin with, but the most cited ghost at this home isn't even mentioned there. Elizabeth Crawley inherited this house from her husband who passed in 1910, and her ghost has never left. After her husband died, she went into a deep depression and would rarely leave the home. She converted one of the upstairs rooms into a space to perform rituals. It's said that after her husband died, she only left this house twice and eventually died in it by herself. Now, you'll know her ghost is present because there'll be a sudden and stark change in temperature whenever she nears. All of this lore has, of course, created a ton of interest around the home, and it's been featured on several Australian ghost television shows through the years. However, you can also stay at this home if you wanted for $200 a night and experience all of this ghostly stuff for yourself. Why you would want to pay $200 of your actual money to get haunted and potentially even cursed is beyond me, but hey, to each their own, I guess. And finally, number 1 on this list is Port Arthur. Port Arthur is located in the Australian state of Tasmania, which is actually an island state 240 kilometers off of the Australian mainland. Port Arthur initially served as a penal site by the British Empire several hundreds of years ago. Towards the end of the 1700s, Britain stopped sending their prisoners to the Americas and instead started shipping them to Australia. What's even better than going to the mainland, though, was this small island state that they also owned in the middle of nowhere. Countless prisoners over the following decades were shipped off to Tasmania, with Port Arthur being one of the biggest final destinations for these criminals. Once they got there, their lives were never the same. Many of these people that were shipped here had committed small crimes out of sheer necessity, stealing some food to survive or something to keep their families warm. The severity of the crime mattered little to the British authorities though, and even if it was something as small and insignificant as this, you could very easily find yourself stuck in this prison for the remainder of your life. The prisoners that got sent here were forced to work tirelessly in the timber, lumbering, and shipbuilding industries. Port Arthur actually boomed for the next 100 years, with more and more convicts being sent here. This was obviously very beneficial for the British government, but not so much so for the people who had to make this place their home. Many of them were mercilessly killed for no good reason. They were often tortured consistently if they weren't working hard enough or had done something that wasn't totally up to the standard. It really was a horrible way of life for those who got sent to Port Arthur. At around the end of the 1800s, Port Arthur started to slow down and eventually stopped altogether. The death of this location didn't end though, because in 1996, Port Arthur saw one of Australia's darkest moments ever. 35 people were gunned down in a mass shooting that took place at Port Arthur. All of this death from various generations has caused Port Arthur to be one of Australia's most haunted spots. In fact, over the years, there have been more than 2,000 incidents of unexplained paranormal activity. Things moving, voices shrieking, change in temperature, you name it, it's taken place at this location before. The asylum at Port Arthur is said to be the most haunted spot here, with reports of people getting scratched and touched by unseen entities. Port Arthur has had a horrible history to it, and it's not a place I'd recommend venturing out to if you do happen to catch yourself in the Australian state of Tasmania. Number 5 on this list is the Molly Brown House. If you live in Denver, then there is no way that you aren't familiar with this haunted place. Thrillist says you've no doubt heard of the Molly Brown House and likely passed it on the street once or twice too. Molly Brown was a notable member of Denver's elite and perhaps known best for being a Titanic survivor, and despite allegedly living a relatively happy life, visitors to the museum and staff have reported quite a bit of strange happenings. Some have smelled what's believed to be husband J.J. Brown's pipe, or have witnessed lights off and on the fritz, and staff have reported furniture being seemingly rearranged. Sometimes figures can even be seen roaming the house. A visit is worth it alone for the history, but the potential for getting a bit spooked or walking into a cold spot is definitely an added bonus. We once again have one of those locations where no one has any idea why it's haunted, it just is. Maybe it's the connection to the Titanic that has got this place acting funky. Obviously, that was a very unnatural occurrence and took the lives of tons of people in a very sad way. So I could believe that the Titanic and the survivor of the Titanic plays some role into why this place is haunted the way that it is. Good news is that this isn't the worst haunting that you can run into. Like, yes, you will get a little scared for sure. You might smell something funny, or have a ghost pull something on you, or even maybe have small valuables go missing. But ultimately, you probably shouldn't be dragged to the underworld here by some shadow demon or anything like that. So I guess if you were to visit any place on this list, then this one wouldn't be the worst. Just be prepared for what's coming, because if you aren't, then it could leave you with some serious mental trauma. Number 4 on this list is Phantom Canyon Road. You need to be very careful on this road because there is a good chance you could suffer a serious crash if you aren't. Thrillist says a haunted road is one thing, but a haunted road in Colorado means you're likely on the edge of a mountain and at some serious elevation. Phantom Canyon Road is a detour off the Gold Belt Tour byway connecting Cripple Creek and Florence, and was originally the railroad for that route. As you drive along, you can clearly see the ghost towns of Wilbur, Adelaide, and Glenbrook, and legend has it that the reason for Phantom Canyon's name is credited to sightings of a man wearing a prison uniform walking along the tracks in the 1890s. The man supposedly had been executed at the Colorado State Penitentiary a few days earlier. So yeah guys, you better have your wits about you, because if you don't, this ghost might come out and startle the crap out of you, and then the next thing you know, you're gonna be face deep into a tree somewhere. It also just adds to the horror ambiance that you're driving past several ghost towns along the way. Like, of course, they just had to be on the side of the road as you're also getting stalked by this ghost prisoner. No one really knows what this prisoner wants with you, but let's face it, I can't imagine it's good. My dude was executed back in the day, so for one, what he did was probably pretty bad to warrant a punishment like that, and then secondly, he literally got executed, and I can only guess that his ghost probably isn't too pleased about that. Y'all need to be especially careful if you're driving down this road, because at any point this guy could pop out. Number 3 on this list is the 5 Fisherman restaurant. This is a restaurant in Halifax, Nova Scotia, known for its exceptional oysters and also its ghostly inhabitants. The ground that this restaurant sits on wasn't always utilized for serving up fish and chips though. In fact, it has a very long history. In the early 1800s is when the building went up, and for a long time it acted as the town's only school. Nothing ghoulish or demonic about that. However, at around the turn of the century, the school moved and the building took on a new purpose. It became the mortuary for Halifax and made its dealings with the dead. Now, not every mortuary is going to become haunted, but this one had quite a lot to deal with over the years. In 1912, the unsinkable ship, the Titanic, sunk. It sunk roughly 640 kilometers off of the eastern shores of Canada, and therefore the closest places to assist with the rescue was these eastern provinces. Halifax acted as the leader in these rescue processes, and because of that, the mortuary had an onslaught of bodies of people whom had died on the ship. 5 years after that tragedy, Halifax incurred one of their own with the massive Halifax explosion. This was where a munitions ship exploded and it killed roughly 2,000 people just like that. This mortuary served as the primary designation for both of these incidents, and due to the unnatural deaths here, it makes sense that some spirits have clung on. Guests and employees alike have reported seeing ghosts all over this mortuary that turned restaurant. One of the dishwashers reported running out of the restaurant when he looked up from what he was doing and was staring directly at a ghost-like specter. The restaurant has attempted to have serious renovations done. However, I don't think that any amount of structural changes will get these spirits to rest for good. Number 2 on this list is the Frank Slide. Now, even though the Frank Slide sounds like it could be a fun, popular dance move that takes over TikTok for a few weeks, it is far more morbid than that. On April 29th in 1903, in the mining town of Frank, which at that time was part of the Northwest Territories but is now a section of Alberta, there was a horrible tragedy. 110 million tons of limestone and rock came tumbling down in one of Canada's biggest landslides ever. This fell onto part of the town of Frank. Frank was located right next to Turtle Mountain, which after extensive mining had grown unstable. On April 29th, it all came crashing down and claimed the lives of 70 to 90 people. It is still to this day Canada's most deadly landslide to ever occur in history, and was a horrible tragedy that can only remind us how fleeting life can be. I think the craziest part about this landslide as well is that it wasn't just miners who were killed. Their wives, their families, all of them died at the hands of the Frank Slide. The remains of these bodies were never recovered either, as the damage from the slide was far too devastating. Where all of this happened is now a section of a town called Crow's Nest Pass, and over a century later, the ghosts of the dead still haunt the area. This place is somewhere where visitors have reported feeling very unsafe. They say that the overall feelings of uneasiness are almost too much to bear and that they have to leave. Cries, howls, screams, this can all be heard late at night as you're trying to sleep. Lanterns will be seen in the night walking around at the hands of unknown apparitions. It is basically a full ghost town of people who never deserved to die in the first place, all wanting to get a second just to feel their lives again as they were so unfairly ripped away from them. Definitely one of Canada's most horrific tragedies, and now home to one of its most haunted locations. Number 1 on this list is the Banff Springs Hotel. This hotel is located in Banff, Alberta, and is truly one of the creepiest places that I've ever read about. Now, first off, I want to note the hotel itself looks gorgeous on the outside. The beautiful nature it is surrounded by is stunning, and the hotel gives me some serious Harry Potter Hogwarts vibes. However, when I say that this place is surrounded by nature, I really mean it. It is totally out on its own, with no other buildings in sight at all. The secluded site has been around for 132 years and has housed its fair share of visitors. Some of these visitors have had some incredible stays. I mean, when you look it up online, the hotel has a 4.7 Google rating, so I mean, it's pretty freaking good. Some of the guests, though, they never checked out. In the 1920s, a couple was set to have their wedding at this hotel. On the day of the ceremony, though, the bride, while she was walking down one of the hotel's beautiful marble staircases, tripped and fell, smacking her head on her descent and dying on the spot. This bride's spirit is one of the most notable sightings people have had when they're staying at this hotel. It's said that they often see a phantom in a wedding dress ascending and descending the stairs very quickly. She's also been seen in the ballroom dancing alone, potentially dreaming of the dance that she wanted so desperately to have with the husband that she never got to marry. In 1975, a longtime bellman of the hotel, Sam, died there. Since then, sightings of Sam have been pretty consistent. One story details how 2 women lost their room key and called the front desk to go and get it. The front desk person sent someone to go and open their room for these ladies. When that person had got there, though, the ladies were already in the room and said that another bellman had let them in. They described Sam to a T when they spoke about the bellman who helped them out. Instances like this have occurred time and time again at the hotel, with many people believing his spirit is still working there. Finally, with this hotel, hotel, you have room 873. Room 873 is rumored to be the home of a gruesome murder. One evening, a family was staying there and the father, for some unknown reason, lost his mind, murdering his family and himself. After completely refurbishing the room, the hotel put it back in service, but now people who have stayed there report hearing the screams and the cries as if they were still dying. If you have to stay at this hotel, definitely avoid room 873.
Coming in at number 5, we have Goldfield, Arizona. Being deemed as one of Arizona's most haunted places, we have the town of Goldfield. Founded in 1893, Goldfield was a promising land for gold mining. The town grew rapidly, gaining 1,500 residents during its first year. The space was quick to build businesses including stores, a blacksmith, a butcher, a brewery, and 3 saloons. Though the town of Goldfield met its fall just as quickly as it was built up. After 5 short years, the gold ran out and people began to dwindle, eventually leaving it fully abandoned, securing its ghost town status. Being classified as a ghost town doesn't necessarily mean a place is haunted by ghosts, but this is not the case for the Goldfield ghost town. There's plenty of documentation and investigations that point to Goldfield being a paranormal active ground. It is known that a mysterious figure lurks within the shadows of the Goldfield ghost town, Bordello. It is unclear who this spirit would have been in life, yet it is commonly believed he was once a miner who lived in the town. Unexplainable knocks and bangs are heard in the building and some unfortunate visitors have been scratched. This activity is attributed to a dark character who's usually seen wearing a cowboy hat. Just on the horizon of the Goldfield ghost town sits a landscape made ominous by its name and the legends surrounding it. The Superstition Mountains are cloaked in mystery and at the center of many fables, making them notorious among the paranormal community. The Superstition Mountains carry many secrets, the most famous being the location of a supposed deposit of gold and riches in the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. A curse has kept this treasure safe since the days of Goldfield's mining boom. Many have set out to locate these riches and many have returned empty-handed or found only death. Countless adventurers have perished in the Arizona heat pursuing this chase. Their ghosts are said to now haunt the mountainside. Other secrets of the mountain have people believing that the hill is a place where evil spirits hid and told stories of a devil that lived behind the mountain. There's also a rumored apparition of a hugely tall skeleton named the Borrego Phantom, which appears to those exploring the mountain after dark. Another layer of creepiness is added to the mountain by the local legend that reptile-looking people surface there after dark. All of these creepy mysteries are summed up pretty nicely in the Superstition Mountain's name. In at number 4 we have Glen Rio, New Mexico. Found on the state border of Texas and New Mexico lies the town of Glen Rio. Founded in 1901, it was a town where wheat and cattle farmers settled and grew a community. Being divided between 2 states made for some unusual customs in Glen Rio. The mail would arrive at a train depot on the Texas side, but would have to be transported to the post office on the New Mexico side. The Texas side was part of a dry county, so all the bars were on the New Mexico side. Because the gasoline tax was higher in New Mexico, all the service stations were on the Texas side. By 1920, Glen Rio had a hotel, a hardware store, and a land office, as well as several grocery stores, service stations, and cafes. Though Glen Rio's permanent population never rose above 30 people, the town survived with its tourist-based businesses catering to the many travelers along Route 66. By 1985, only 2 residents remained in the small town, and the Texas post office was the only business open. It too has long since closed. Other buildings have overgrown sites, missing windows, or debris surrounding them. The detritus of 4 decades when Glen Rio welcomed tens of thousands, fed and entertained them, and sent them on their way towards Chicago or California.
Number 3 on this list is Central City Masonic Cemetery. Of course we had to have a cemetery on this list. No haunted place list would be complete without at least one of them. Thrillist says, founded as a mining town in the late 1800s, Central City is now known as a destination for those looking to head to the hills for a gambling fix in the casinos that now dot the area. But one thing hasn't changed. The woman in black who twice a year appears in this hilltop cemetery above the town. Known as the Columbine Lady, she comes to visit the grave of John Cameron, a prominent former resident of Central City who died in 1884. Some believe she is his fiancée, appearing to leave flowers for her lost love on November 1st, the anniversary of Cameron's death, and April 5th, a date for which the significance remains a mystery, much like the woman herself. This place is safe to go to if, of course, you do not go during these times. She's been coming for a long time, and anyone who tried to interfere with her has had to pay the price. Now, people kind of suspect that she was in a relationship with John Cameron, but there's also another theory. Many people think that John actually wronged her in his life, and that this woman in black comes twice a year to double check that John is still dead and hasn't come back to life by some means. Pretty scary tale for sure, one that you probably don't want to get involved with. Number 2 on this list is the Broadmoor. Located in Colorado Springs, this hotel would be freaking awesome if it wasn't so haunted. Thrillist says this sprawling 5-star hotel has a lot to offer for anyone seeking a relaxing and indulgent getaway. But along with the golf course, spa, and nearby zoo, there's one feature you won't find in any brochure. Staff and guests alike have reported the presence of a woman, often in the penthouse where Julia Penrose, co-founder of the property, once lived. While not confirmed, Penrose's death is said to have been surrounded by a strange occurrence in which she went missing and was later found, confused and shaking in the woods nearby with no memory of how she got there. She passed away a week later, and perhaps her spirit remains, watching over the property and seeking answers about her own mysterious death. Now I am wondering, man, how did Penrose die? Like, this whole story feels like a movie or something like that. I truly think somebody needs to get in here and investigate what the heck happened here. Because, like, should we be scared of the region because this is gonna happen again? Was Julia doing something specific before she disappeared, and should we avoid doing that thing? There are just so many questions that need to be answered here, and sadly I can't do it from the comfort of Toronto. That being said, I'm also not trying to end up like Julia, and therefore will be leaving this job to somebody far more qualified. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Highlands Ranch Mansion. A truly picturesque mansion, one that's been standing for over 100 years and one that's home to a ghostly spirit. Thrillist says this sprawling stone mansion, built in 1891, is often rented for weddings and events due to its impressive structural beauty and picturesque prairie views. But it's also a historic property and somewhat of a museum of the times, with a bit of paranormal activity sprinkled in. The ghost of Julia Kistler, daughter of F. Kistler, who bought the property in 1926, is said to haunt the home, with visitors and staff alike reporting hearing a woman's sobs, seeing a silhouette figure moving about when the mansion was otherwise vacant, and lights sporadically turning on and off. I don't know about you guys, but during my wedding ceremony, I want to hear beautiful sounding music, not the sobs of some ghost woman thing. Apparently she's crying all the time, and this woman's emotions are not something to play with. There's a story where once several children were playing around here. There was a wedding ceremony scheduled here for later that day, and the children were off doing what kids do before the proceedings got underway. They ran into this ghost crying, and then they started to make fun of her. They were rude and definitely unkind, but they also didn't deserve what she did next. It's said that in a fit of rage, she flew inside their bodies and possessed each and every one of them for a short time, showing them things that were truly terrifying. Things that have ultimately changed those boys' lives and altered their mentality forever. Any ghost that's capable of doing something like that, that's one that I don't want to be around.
In 5th place, we have Isla de las Muñecas, Mexico. Decided to kick off today by being an overachiever. This is an entire abandoned island. The island of the dolls in Mexico is like something straight out of a horror movie, but my kind of horror movie. Located on Texuelo Lake, it is home to hundreds of hanging, slowly decaying dolls, thanks to a man named Don Julian Santana. Over 50 years ago, Don Santana left his wife and child and moved onto an island on Texuelo Lake in the Exoquimelicos canals. According to him, a young girl actually drowned in the lake in the 1950s, and Don Julian Santana devoted his life to honoring this lost soul by collecting and hanging up dolls by the hundreds. Eventually, he transformed the entire island into a doll-infested wonderland. Now, he began collecting lost dolls from the canals and the trash near his island home. He's also said to to have traded produce he grew to locals for more dolls. Don didn't really clean up the dolls or attempt to fix them, but he rather put them up with missing eyes and limbs, covered in dirt, and generally in whatever ramshackle state he found them in. Even when dolls arrived in good shape, the wind and weather turned them into cracked and distorted versions of themselves. Don also kept his cabin filled with the dolls, which he dressed in headdresses, sunglasses, and other various accessories. Despite the fact that most people found the island frightening, Don saw the dolls as beautiful protectors, and he welcomed visitors, whom he would, show around, charging a small fee for taking photos. In 2001, Don Santana was found drowned in the same area in which he believed that small child had passed away. According to legend, the dolls in the island are haunted by the spirits of the dead girl, and perhaps even by Don himself. Okay, who wants to go on a road trip with me? Anyone?
Oh, thanks.
In fourth place, we have Pripyat, Ukraine. So Pripyat is an abandoned city in northern Ukraine located near the border with Belarus. Named after the nearby river of the same name, it was founded on February 4th of 1970 as the 9th Atomgrad, which was a type of closed town in the Soviet Union to serve the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which was located in the adjacent ghost city of Chernobyl. So Pripyat was officially proclaimed a city in 1979 and had grown to a population of around 49,000 by the time it was evacuated on the afternoon of April 27th of 1986, one day after the Chernobyl disaster, making it younger as a city at that time than I am now. Although it was located within the administrative district of Ivankiv Rayon, the abandoned municipality now has a status of City of Regional Significance within the larger Kyiv Oblast and is administered directly from the capital of Kyiv. Pripyat is also supervised by the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, which manages activities for the entire Chernobyl exclusion zone. So following the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the entire population of Pripyat was moved to the purpose-built city of Slavutich. At the time of the evacuation, the average age of residents was about 26 years old, and the city housed 13,414 apartments in 160 apartment blocks, with 18 halls of residence accommodating up to, let's say, 7,600 single males or females, and 8 halls of residence for married couples. In terms of education, there were 15 kindergartens and elementary schools for 4,980 children, each with their own nickname, and 5 secondary schools for about 6,000 students. In 2019, it was announced that folks could start visiting the affected areas if certain health and safety procedures were followed, but I don't feel like visiting a radiation-affected city is high up on my bucket list at this point in time.
In at number 3, we have Nevada City in Montana. Miners settled in Nevada City in 1963, along with establishing their homes and businesses in this new town. Located in southwestern Montana, the town is 1.5 miles from Virginia City. The town was thriving up until 1876 when the gold miners moved to other promising sites. In 1896, the Connery Placer Mining Company destroyed most of the city's buildings. The company dredged the gulch and later abandoned it, leaving heavy wooden barges. This abandoned town being haunted is old news, as the Nevada City Hotel is reported to be frequented by the apparition of a road agent who lost their life nearby, according to online sources. Visitors have also reported hearing footsteps in the hallways and seeing shadowy figures standing behind their reflections in mirrors. Additionally, the spirit of an older cowboy figure who never speaks but lurks in the hotel rooms and even sits at the bar in the Virginia City. Back when the hotel operated, guests also complained of a weeping woman, always in the same room, only to be told there was no guest in the room in question. In at number 2, we have Kusta, Idaho. The mining town of Kusta was born in 1879 by gold miners looking for their next gold hotspot. Prospectors discovered gold in what would become known as the Yankee Fork area of central Idaho in 1867. The area was worked on a small scale for more than a decade before the discovery of General Kusta Mine. The General Kusta Mining Company closed in 1888 and the district experienced a sharp decline. In 1899, the town of Kusta has 5 saloons, 3 stores, a hotel and 3 boarding houses, but the town never established even one church. By 1910, most of the mines in the area were closed, and the Yankee Forks boom years came to an end. The combined population of Kusta and the nearby Bonanza was just 66 people. The Silver Messenger reports just 2 families remaining in Kusta in 1911, and then being fully abandoned the year following. Today, it has been purchased by the US Forestry Service and, in conjunction with the Friends of Kusta Society, is slowly being made into a historic site. Some original buildings have already been renovated, some are in process, and many others are slated to be restored. Several buildings lost in a 1960s grass fire are due to be replaced with replicas. The Forgotten Town is a landmark for many people such as tourists and especially paranormal investigators. In the old schoolhouse is a museum containing items left behind and showcases the town's unique history. Although interesting, you can't help but get an eerie feeling thinking about the people who once owned these items, as walking into one of these structures is like walking back in time. To think this town was once active with human energy and miners working every single day. And finally, in at number 1 we have South Pass City, Wyoming. Only about 10 miles north of the Oregon Trail is the shell of a town that used to be a busy gold mining camp. Established in a small valley along the banks of Willow Creek, the town was born in 1867. The town was built there because gold was discovered in the Wind River Mountains. By 1868, South Pass City boasted over 250 buildings, 1,000 people, and hundreds of claims. The town was extremely busy as its half-a-mile-long main street boasted numerous hotels, restaurants, general stores, 2 newspapers, doctors, a bowling alley, and dozens of saloons. The mining district continued to grow to as many as 3,000 residents. Miners looking for investors and newspapers promoting further settlement in the area exaggerated the region's amount of gold. But for South Pass City, its great success wouldn't last, and just 2 years after its establishment would begin to show its first signs of declining. Hitting a fall in early 1869, the town resurged briefly after outsider capital was poured into the area, but would fall again as expenses and hardships to recover the gold proved too costly for most miners. By 1872, the town was only occupied by only a few hundred people. In the end, South Pass would become a permanent ghost town. By 1949, the last of the pioneer families had moved on from South Pass City, and the buildings had fallen into disrepair. The grounds of the old town are known to be haunted, and Highway 287 that follows the route of the Oregon Trail over South Pass, which is the reason South Pass City ever existed, has had its fair share of ghost sightings. According to a local ghost story, a woman was driving home from a long day in Denver. Her friend had fallen asleep in the passenger seat. After passing through Jeffrey City, the driver spotted a dark, hunched figure walking toward the road in the sagebush. About a half-mile later, she saw the same figure closer to the road. She noted his pig coat as he became clearer. About a half-mile later, still thinking about this man and his surprising reappearance, she reached over to wake her friend and request she take a turn driving. As her friend awoke, she saw the same man at the edge of the road, just crossing the white line onto the highway next to the car. Screaming, they accelerated away and compared descriptions. It was certainly the same man.